This video is a rebuttal of the Zionist claim that the people of Israel were basically kicked out by the Romans around 70 AD. So that's something that's taught amongst Zionist Christians, and obviously Zionist Jews have told the world that basically we were kicked out of Palestine and it's our rightful home, and that's why we're there now. And this video here rebuts that claim.
We've all heard the story. Jews were expelled from Judea by the Romans, scattered across the globe, and after 2,000 years of wandering, have now returned to reclaim their birthright. It's a powerful narrative, foundational to modern Zionism. But is it historically accurate? Let's examine the evidence. Was the Jewish diaspora truly created by a Roman expulsion? And what are the probabilities that diaspora Jews are direct descendants of those expelled? Let's look at the history. Like the Phoenicians and Greeks, Jews spread across the Mediterranean in search of trade and opportunity. Scholarly opinion diverges on the size of the diaspora at the time of the Roman conquest. Some put 80% in the diaspora and 20% in Judea and Galilee. Others argue it was closer to a 50-50 split. Either way, at least half of the world's Jews were in the diaspora at the time of the Roman conquest. This was not a diaspora of refugees, but one of immigrants seeking opportunity. The Roman-Jewish wars were catastrophic, but the devastation was localized.
Now, he says there that the devastation was localized, and that is actually true. So a lot of Christians now are going to be thinking to themselves, this video can't be true because Jesus said that basically Israel would be destroyed. Well, that's not what he said. He didn't say that, and he didn't say that all the people of Israel would be scattered. He talks about in Matthew 24, Luke 21, for example, when his disciples were talking about the temple and how, it was beautiful. And then he said there would be no stone left upon each other, and which is true. The temple is laid waste to, and it's never been rebuilt. And obviously that happened in 70 AD. But I want to read from Luke 21, because this video there says that the devastation or the destruction was localized. And Jesus himself speaks of it in Luke 21, verses 20 onwards to 24. And he says, "And when you shall see Jerusalem compassed about with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let them not that are in the countries, or it can be interpreted in the fields, enter thereinto. For these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. But woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck. And in those days, for there shall be great distress in the land, and wrath upon this people. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations." And you may be thinking, there you go. No, listen to what he says. "And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled." So he's talking about Jerusalem. He's not talking about the entire area of Palestine.
Most of the victims of Rome's reprisals were either killed outright or sold into slavery. The enslaved were scattered across the empire, and most would eventually be assimilated into local populations. The Talmud, written centuries later, makes clear there was a religious obligation to ransom enslaved Jews, and this may have taken place in cities like Rome, where communities were strong. But I have found no records of it actually happening. Nothing to suggest large numbers of slaves were freed. Against a diaspora of millions, it was almost certainly just a drop in the bucket. Ancient sources Josephus and Cassius Dio give figures of 1.1 million dead, 97,000 enslaved after Jerusalem's fall, and 580,000 killed in the Bar Kokhba River. Modern historians think these figures are inflated, but nonetheless, it is certain the carnage was horrific. Josephus observes that some escaped to nearby regions.
And no one's saying that the carnage wasn't horrific. Obviously, Jesus himself speaks there of how bad it would be. So no one's saying that these Jewish believers did not suffer. What we're saying is that the story that we are given of this, expulsion by the Romans is not true.
The devastation without noting any refugees. The record is clear on killings and enslavement, but silent on deportation. Those who fled did so on their own, and their numbers were evidently too small to warrant more than passing notice. At this stage of the empire, Rome's approach, unlike the Neo-Babylonians' policy of deportation and resettlement, was to destroy rebellious cities and sell survivors into slavery. No organized mass exodus would have survived the Roman regions. They would have been...
And that's a key point. They would have been slaughtered on the way, and he goes on to say that. So there was no mass exodus. They wouldn't have just allowed them to leave. But obviously, when they sacked the city at Jerusalem, there were a lot of people killed and then sold into slavery.
Judging from the historical record, the actual refugee influx from the Roman wars would have added between 1% and 5% to the diaspora, depending on whether the diaspora was 80% or 50% of the Jewish population. In other words, the odds that any 20th century diaspora Jew had an ancestor who was a Roman exile are slim to negligible.
And this is a point sort of raised by an Israeli Jewish author, historian, Shlomo Sand, in his book, The Invention of the Jewish People. And he actually talks about this and says that obviously there's no record of this Roman expulsion of Jews, this mass exodus of Jews in 70 AD. And he does say that the remaining people, the Jewish people that remained, over periods of time, converted to Islam. Some were Christians anyway and stayed as Christians, and a small percentage obviously stayed as Jews. So what he says, this is Shlomo Sand, an Israeli Jew, says that actually the Palestinian people are actually the true Semites, and they would have had ancestors that were Jews, and these people are Muslims now because when Palestine was conquered, a lot of them converted to Islam.
Creating the diaspora come from? It was invented in the Middle Ages in reaction to the total destruction of one of the largest and most influential Jewish communities in history. 6 months after the Christian conquest of Muslim Spain in...
And then need to just highlight the fact that here he says the Christian conquest of Muslim Spain. It wasn't the Christian conquest of Muslim Spain, it was the Roman Catholic conquest of Spain.
And the other 50% were expelled. That's not counting the thousands who were killed. Faced with Christian claims that exile was divine punishment, Jewish scholars retrofitted Roman violence into a story of expulsion that countered the Christian narrative. By reframing the Roman reprisals as a forced exile, they established a heroic foundation for the diaspora. It was a coherent, unifying story that gave meaning to the suffering of a community scattered across the globe and traumatized by the events in Spain. The popular narrative of a singular cataclysmic Roman expulsion that created the Jewish diaspora is a powerful myth, but it never happened. The reality is that the Jewish diaspora was a dynamic global phenomenon that existed for centuries before the Roman-Jewish wars. The story of the ancient Jewish people is therefore one not of expulsion, but of the audacity to go wherever opportunity led them, while still preserving their religion and culture. It's an inspiring story, just not the story the Zionists needed. The Zionists wanted to make it appear that a millennia-old wrong of involuntary expulsion was being righted. But the reality is, like every other immigrant group in the world, the ancestors of the Zionists left looking for a better life. What about the Jews who stayed? Most of them converted to Christianity and then to Islam and are still living where they have lived for.
And that's exactly what I was saying before, indicated by historian Shlomo Sand, that they stayed. Some of them were Christians anyway, or converted to Christianity, and many of them converted to Islam, and they stayed in Palestine.
Irony. They are being expelled from their homes by the descendants of immigrants who abandoned Judea for greener pastures before the Romans ever set foot in the Levant. Thanks for watching.
And that's the reality, that the Palestinian people that are living there today are direct descendants of those Jews, predominantly, that lived there in the past, converted to Islam, or they were Christians or converted to Christianity. And these Jewish Israelis that have moved in there, they are immigrants into the land. Many of them are Europeans, and they are not native to the land of Palestine. So the Zionist narrative is that the land was theirs. So if you're a Jew, bearing in mind Judaism is a religion, many of them converted to Judaism. They have moved into what is now called, what they call Israel, and they're claiming that that was the land that they were expelled from, when in reality, many of them just simply moved out, and many of the people living there now that are called Jews have no Semitic blood whatsoever.